What is up, YouTube? Today, I just wanted to go over some things that have been working well for me when prepping for my OCB show. I plan to compete in March of next year. So, the whole purpose of this video is when I looked up, you know, tips, or guide, anything like that, things that worked for other people for their natural show, nothing really came up. There was a lot of enhanced guys, of course, pumping out videos, but in terms of, specifically discussing the OCB and, the website and other things to be prepared for, specifically for natural shows and OCB shows, there wasn't a lot of content out there, and I just wanted to put my 2 cents out there. Now, I'm only 9 weeks into prep, and I have 21 weeks left, so long road ahead, but I did want to put this out there for anyone who potentially could be wondering what my prep is like and the process that I went through, whether they're competing or whether they're just interested in the topic. So I just figured I will get into it. So the first thing I thought of in terms of taking the step towards competing was, do I really want this? And if so, what federation am I going to choose? And who's going to be my coach? So those are my first two questions. And immediately I kind of came to the decision that I wanted to compete within the OCB. The OCB stands for the Organization of Competition Bodies. And essentially, they are the most well-known natural federation that I know of. And obviously, I am natural, and I wanted to have a level playing field against other natural athletes. There are natural guys that do NPC shows. Those are non-tested shows. So they're potentially going up against some enhanced guys, and kudos to them. That's great, but that's not something I was personally trying to do myself. And so I made that choice. And then after that, I came to the decision that I wanted my coach, Caden, to help me through the prep process. I had been following his content for a long time. I will have him linked. Everything of his will be linked in the description. He's an amazing coach. Completely supports me in every way. Extremely knowledgeable about the sport. Has, all the accolades, has competed before, and he clearly shows that he's all in on everything bodybuilding. So everything of his will be down below, and he's been pretty popular on TikTok. That's how I came across him, and I only see him growing his coaching business in the future. And so it was a pretty easy decision, especially in the fact that he wasn't super expensive. I won't detail all of that here, but that also worked out for me. Considering I am a college student, I'm still, not fully where I want to be yet financially. So that was also a big factor in my decision. So yeah, he was just super high quality for nothing outrageous, because coaching is expensive. That is something that you will have to worry about going into a show. So those are the first two things I wanted to detail to get out of the way. But kind of my third step in the process was getting familiar with everything. What is this going to look like? How is all of this going to work? And Caden was very hands-on during the beginning process. So we had an initial call, and he kind of laid everything out for me and made it super simple. He showed me the template that he uses for his coaching, and it was very simple, and I fully understood what we were getting into there. And then after that, I was all about, how am I going to look on stage? Like, what kind of poses am I doing? What am I going to have an individual routine? Like, how is this going to work? How long am I going to be on stage? And that largely comes down to the athlete. So what I did was I went to the website and I looked at the description that they have on there for the first-time competitors. And I just went through and read everything over and over and over to really understand and grasp, in terms of how long is the individual posing routine going to be, what kind of classes am I going to be entering, or what should I enter? And that was something I bounced off my coach as well, because my plan is, as of right now, is to do debut, novice, and open. So that requires some extra money for a crossover entry. That's how the OCB refers to it. And basically it's paying extra to be competitive in multiple classes, to potentially, place within those classes as well, depending on the amount of guys that enter for that competition in that class specifically. So I thought it was very beneficial to really delve deep into that. And so now I think I'm just going to rattle off some tips that really helped me throughout this first third of my prep. Again, I'm not saying that I'm an expert and that I know everything when it comes to prep. However, I do think I have found a lot of things that have worked well for me throughout this process to have made it as easy as possible on myself, because the process only gets harder throughout prep. So it's important to take everything into consideration, and, bounce things off my coach. It's important to be coachable with this. So the first tip I have is understand that no matter how much of an initial base of knowledge that you think you have gathered before prep, there are going to be things that you don't fully grasp until you do it for the first time. That was something that I had to come to realize, which I already knew that going in, but really doing everything, particularly like the posing and all the minute details, those are things that I had never done personally. So that's the first tip. Be coachable. Understand that you're not going to know everything going in. Tip number 2, de-stress. I can't express this enough. Stress that feeds into everything, particularly sleep, which impacts recovery, could impact your weight, and your workouts are impacted by your sleep quality. So everything affects everything when it comes to stress. So cut out all the big stressors that you have, because it's never been more important to really hone in on what you need to do. And if there are people getting in your way, stressing you out, taking your mind off of what it needs to be on, they gotta go, because this process is only going to get harder, and you're going to be stressed out from prep as it is. So eliminate the stressors. That's tip number 2. This goes into point number 2, but tip number 3 is to take your sleep as serious as you can. So I supplement with melatonin on occasion when I can't sleep. I try to take naps to make up for sleep. And as easy as it sounds, the less food you have, the more likely it is to struggle with sleep. That's something I ran into a little bit when we first started prep. So that was a challenge that I hadn't really foreseen, because I've never had a struggle sleeping. And so hunger will keep you up. So plan out your meals. Maybe if you don't want to go to bed hungry, put your meals further back in the day, or have a, somewhat of a higher carb, higher fat meal, something heavier within any of the macronutrients, but particularly, fat and protein. Particularly at the end of the day, maybe you could save yourself some hunger and you won't wake up throughout the night needing to do that. And the same thing with fluids. That was another thing that I learned throughout prep, is drinking a lot of fluids later in the day is not great, because I'm kind of a night owl, at least as of late. So if I drink a lot of fluids, past 7 p.m., things like that, I'm end up multiple nights I've woken up and I've had to, piss 2 or 3 times, and that interrupts sleep. That's not what we want. We want as restful sleep as we can get, because that's the main factor that helps with recovery, at least for myself. So that's tip number 3. Tip number 4, understand that you are going to have a lot of cravings randomly throughout this process. I knew what I was getting into when I signed up for this prep, but even though I have the will to keep pushing, it's still, pretty much a daily struggle. There's going to be times where you have a lot of food noise potentially, and you're going to crave really hyper palatable foods. And depending on the amount of calories that you're taking in, or what your coach wants you to have, depending on who is your coach, that might not be an option. Personally, with my coach, my coach told me that he's never going to really tell me that he needs me to eat a certain food. So I found my prep diet to be a little bit more flexible. I'm able to incorporate some things that curb my cravings, things like, Halo Top here and there, candy here and there, just a couple servings, nothing too crazy, just to curb those cravings, as long as digestion is fine. So control it as best you can, and if not, there are ways to get around it. So caffeine has been my best friend throughout prep. I have been, frankly, abusing it, probably a little too much at times, but it's a great appetite suppressant. It's carbonated, so the bubbles fill up your stomach. Same thing with diet soda. So those two things are going to be your best friend. Drink a ton of water, any fluid to fill up your stomach. As soon as you wake up, get all your fluids in as soon as you can, because that way they'll probably be mostly out of your system by the time you go to sleep. So that is something that I have used throughout prep, and it has helped me a lot. Next, I will discuss digestion. I cannot remember if this is tip number 4 or tip number 5, but next I will be discussing digestion. Now, digestion has always been something that I haven't really worried about when I was doing bodybuilding more so as a lifestyle, but it's huge. Digestion, has to do with nutrient absorption, and if your body isn't getting the nutrients it needs from the foods you're having, then there's a lot that can go wrong there. It's not something you want to deal with. So having yogurt with pre and probiotics, supplementing with pre and probiotics are something that I do regularly. That's helped me a lot. Fiber intake, keep an eye on it. I think it's worth focusing on getting in. Fruit, of course. Fruit is something that you can use that will help curb cravings, increase your satiety because of the high volume, things like that. So I can't recommend that enough. And then the next tip I will be discussing is learn posing. Become obsessed with posing, because I just had my first call with my coach where we ran through all my poses, and he watched me hit them, live in time. And he's able to look at everything, like the amount of time that I can hold on my poses, my transitions between my poses, everything like that. Very important, because pictures are one thing, but when you have someone sitting there and watching you in every minute detail within the pose that you're hitting, that's when the flaws within your posing are truly exposed. And there's things that I still need to work on myself, but understanding what your weaker poses are in terms of your execution, or maybe even your muscle groups, like maybe you need to hit a pose a different way to enhance, a leg that you think is slightly more developed than the other, like putting a leg forward, or putting a leg back that's smaller, things like just little cues like that, but they end up, you know, meaning a lot when you're on stage with guys that are hitting the same poses. So it's important to understand your strong points genetically, your weak points, how to disguise them in your posing, practicing vacuums if you feel that you have a good vacuum that you can utilize on stage, especially within classic physique. Within men's physique, I know that their posing is a lot different, but it's always good to be able to have that midsection control. So that's something I'm currently working on because I can't hold a vacuum very well, and that's something we want to utilize when I hit the stage. So that's huge. And that kind of leads into my next point is watching film is one of the best things I could have ever done. I found the OCB on YouTube, and they post VODs basically of their entire streams for their competitions. And I'm able to look at all of the classic physique call outs and how they're hitting a certain pose, what physiques are getting rewarded above others, what are some things that they could have done better that I know that I won't run into because I have seen them struggle with, like in terms of, it can be something as simple as how they're hitting a pose, their angles, their breathing. That's another huge part of being on stage is you got to have that core control. Even if you're not trying to hit a vacuum, you can't be blowing air in and out constantly, because you're going to have guys up there that'll just be completely locked in and you can't even tell they're breathing. This was especially apparent because I went to an OCB show in person and I was able to see how all these guys and girls presented themselves on stage, and it was a wholly different experience. I would highly recommend you guys doing that. If any of you are thinking about competing, go look at them. Go to a show first, particularly the federation that you're interested in competing in, so you can see what your potential competition looks like. Now, there could be a show that is super stacked that you went to, and then your show could be really weak in terms of competition. That's something that's out of your control. But if you have a guideline for how long they have everyone posing up there, for what the judges reward, you know, in terms of physique development, like do they prefer the conditioning or do they prefer the bigger look, things like that. You know, it's very important to become a student of the sport, particularly any sport this applies to, but particularly bodybuilding, because there can be a lot of disconnect from just being at home and watching something on a screen versus being there in person. Because in my mind, I was like, I think I can hang with some of these guys, but I'm not sure. And then when I saw that indie show in person, that was when I realized, oh, I think I can. I really do think I can hang with these guys. And that's not me being, that's not me coming from a place of arrogance. It's more so coming from a place of added confidence, because I didn't know what I was really getting into. This is my first show, but now I know and understand that. Now I understand that there's a chance that I can do really well in the sport. You know, I'm going to be 22 next month, and I went to the show I went to, and a 22-year-old got his pro card. And, you know, that really opened my eyes and made me understand that bodybuilding there's no perfect age you need to be successful. So if you're thinking about pulling the trigger, just do it. There's not going to be a perfect time to do it. That's actually my last tip for this video, is there's never going to be a perfect time to pull the trigger on prep. So if that's something you've been thinking about for a long time, there's never going to be an ideal time. I've told myself that for the longest time, but even I put it off a little bit longer than I feel I should have because I wanted more size. That's a big concern that my coach told me that everyone comes to him with is, oh, I think I need more size. I need more size. But conditioning and posing are things that you can control and get better at more and more throughout prep. And within a deficit, you can still gain size under certain circumstances, but conditioning and posing is where competitions are won because to some extent, everyone's going to have an impressive physique from a muscularity standpoint, but it's all about how you present it and what you bring to the stage. So that's my last tip is, if you feel like you're in a good spot to pull the trigger, just do it because you never know what's going to pop up later in life. And there could be other commitments that pull you away and pull your focus and attention away from what you personally want to do. So do what you want to do right now because tomorrow isn't guaranteed. And coming from a person who did pull the trigger after a long time of waiting and debating, just do it because tomorrow is not promised. And I couldn't be more happy with my decision as of right now. I do have a lot of prep left, so I might be miserable, but I'm going to get the job done. And that's something that I can be proud of for the rest of my life. Even if I get on stage and I go, I never want to do this again. At least I know and I understand and I can say I've done it. I can say I've competed, and not a lot of people can say that because it takes a lot. It's a big undertaking. So I hope this video was somewhat beneficial for you guys. If there's some questions that you guys had, leave a comment. Hopefully my videos only get better as time goes on. I hope I provided a little bit of insight for at least one person out there who had some questions about the OCB or, bodybuilding, natural bodybuilding as a whole. So yeah, if you guys have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down below. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video.